Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gland Bodybuilding. Mountain. And I've had this question a couple times in the last few weeks where somebody asked me in the comments, what do I prefer? Shoulder presses seated or shoulder presses standing? And then I also had somebody ask me whether I prefer barbell presses or dumbbell presses more. Now, it would be very easy for me to say which one is the best based on my own experiences. And again, I keep telling you guys, as much as there are some general truths in this whole bodybuilding thing, there are some general truths when it comes down to training muscles and what muscles do. There always has to be that leeway because of your specific genetics. Each person is built a bit different, so their attachments of muscles and stuff is going to be different. Their weak links are going to be different. So depending on what you are weak in at the time or not necessarily proficient in, that will affect what your preferences are or what you feel you get the best results from when it comes down to your training. But what I can offer is some generalities of what you might experience, and that's what I'm going to give you. So it's not about what's better, it's about what is better depending on the circumstance. So if we're going to talk about seated shoulder presses as opposed to standing, we know that when you are doing a standing shoulder press, a lot more muscles are coming into play. Therefore, there is the very real potential of other muscles being the weak link in the exercise as opposed to the front delts, even though the front delts are getting worked, right? Because you're stabilizing. There's a lot more stabilizing, and the arc of the bar is also different because you're totally upright and you can't bring the bar straight down. You have to bring it more in front of the face and then up. So because of this, when the bar is traveling forward, there's a tendency for people to lean back a bit, which is necessary, at least to stick the chest out anyway, to get that bar in that pathway. Now, when you are doing a seated press, and naturally people lean back into the seat to stabilize that upper thoracic area, and therefore they don't have to worry about stabilizing on the seat at all, and they can also put their shoulders in the right position and lock it in. Now, when you're doing a seated shoulder press, because of this, because there's a certain amount of stabilization going on when you lean into the backrest, there is less possibility of other muscles coming into play to complete the exercise, assuming you're built a certain way, right? So you're built in a way where this type of shoulder press works the shoulders. So that's why a lot of the old school bodybuilders started to do seated shoulder presses, because they found they got better deltoid results from it. Because when they had to lift the weight, sometimes from the floor first, and power clean it into position, and then do their set, a lot of energy was dispersed in different areas that was not necessarily being used on the shoulders themselves. So the shoulders were being worked, but they weren't necessarily the dominating factor of when the set was hitting failure or not. Perhaps there was certain stabilizers in the neck, maybe it was the traps, upper back, along with just the awkwardness of the movement. Maybe their stabilizers in the lower back and stuff were also coming into play. Maybe it was overall systemic fatigue. And also, here's the other thing. One thing you might notice is that when you're doing standing shoulder presses, sometimes, for some of us, especially those of us who have, say, a torn labrum in the shoulder or something like that, sometimes it cuts off a bit of the circulation and causes you to get dizzy when you're using a certain weight. Maybe you're past a certain weight threshold, and then you notice that it cuts off the circulation. And that's not good, right? Because you're firing too much of the neck in the whole movement. And because of that, it may cause you to pass out. You see those deadlift videos where some guys pass out. Well, that's a lot of times what's happening. So in the seated shoulder press, you don't involve the neck quite as much. And this could be a good thing if deltoid development is your first and foremost principle. Now, for myself, I go back and forth depending on what equipment is available. I like the standing shoulder press because of the convenience. I just step into the rack, start shoulder pressing. But I also noticed that it is a slightly different movement than seated shoulder press. Now, the other question I had was dumbbell or barbell shoulder press. What do I prefer? Now, again, let's talk about where your energy is going in a workout. Now, as far as dumbbells go, I love the fact that dumbbells come down in a straight line and straight up. Where, like I said, with the barbell, you are forced to slightly change the position because obviously you can't take the bar right through your head. You have to come to the front and then raise the bar up. So it's going to be a different path of ascension when you're using dumbbells as opposed to barbell. Now, the nice part about barbell presses is that you can have a rack set up and you don't have to get each individual dumbbell in place. You're not wasting energy and risking injury, because I've seen a lot of guys struggle with the dumbbells and have the dumbbells in awkward positions and then injure themselves or tweak something because of it, especially once they start lifting heavy dumbbells into place. So for myself, when I'm using heavier weight, I'd rather use a barbell that's set up in a rack or squat cage or power cage or whatever, and set up a vertical bench, and then lift it off easily and then do the reps. And then when I'm using moderate weight, I'd prefer to use dumbbells in some cases because of the freedom of the movement, and it's just a different angle of attack. Both are great. That's really my answer. Both are great, but if you're struggling to get the dumbbells in place, I'd highly recommend working with barbell if it agrees with you, if you're not having issues. Now, some people like behind the neck press. They find it's a much more straighter path. They can just lean that head forward. But I have to warn you that that is a more risky exercise. It has a stronger risk of injury because you're putting your shoulder in a compromised position. It's in a throwing position, you know, so there can be labral tear injuries happening there if you lose balance, or if you have a bad spotter, or if you use too much weight. So if you're going to do behind the neck sort of movements, I'd highly recommend staying with 15 reps and above at least. And when you're doing heavier stuff, stay more to the front. That's the first thing I would recommend. And second of all, just like I recommended in the last video, if you're going to get a spot with behind the neck presses, make sure you have an experienced person that pays attention. Because I know 2 guys who had a bad spotter and they ended up with dislocating shoulders because of it. So yeah, if you're going to have a spotter, make sure you have a proficient spotter if you're going to do behind the neck press, especially if you're going to do it heavy, you know. So but yeah, that's what I have to say. I mean, I don't have a preference as much, but I have a preference depending on what my purpose is. If my purpose is to hit the delts stronger, seated presses are going to be more efficient for me. But when I want to hit the overall upper thoracic and the postural muscles along with the delts together as a system, then I will do a standing shoulder press. So yeah, I hope this helps out in your training, guys. I hope this helps out in your shoulder training. Hopefully the next time you go to the gym, your shoulders get so pumped up that you can't get through the door and get back home. You know, hopefully that's what this video did for you. And thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. Mountain.